Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Off the Deep End. I met Britta when I was researching for an article about survivor's guilt, and that article is now available in Brains magazine. I found her story to be so inspiring. We talked the next day, I think for 2 hours, right? And all I could say is be prepared to be stunned by her story. And as a fair warning, there's kind of no way that we can really get into her story without touching on a few subjects that might be a bit controversial, but we call it Off the Deep End for a reason, right? Great to have you. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure to talk with you so far, and I'm really looking forward to our discussion. Well, I'm from Minnesota, born and raised here. Um, and I have spent quite a bit of time overseas in Bosnia, working as a journalist there back 20 years ago now. Married my first husband there, lived there off and on for about 20 years. Have three children. Moved back to the States in 2004 and transitioned into working as a copywriter for technology brands. So I write the copy, which is basically the content for their marketing for selling software and other technology products. And over the years, as I've seen the last few years especially, things have really changed in tech. Um, Both with the pandemic, we've had a lot of layoffs. We're still going through a lot of layoffs in the tech field. And then we had AI come in, and AI is, of course, upending everything. So it's a good thing in many, many ways. And it's also a very disruptive thing because it is despite what people are saying. Everybody's saying that AI will not take your job, but there's a lot of fields where AI is going to take your job. And I believe mine is one of them. And I've just noticed that there's a lot of women who are going through transitions, going through a lot of change and upheaval, not just age-wise. I know middle age, that's where I'm at right now, but also the industry is changing so much since, Chat GPT and generative AI can do writing, and it has gotten much, much better at it in the last year or so. And, so I really looked at this as an opportunity. At first, it was scary. It's like, oh my goodness, I've been a freelance writer full time for 20 years, had a wonderful multi-six-figure business built up with that. Really, really have been blessed and enjoyed it all this time. It's given me a wonderful lifestyle. I could stay home with my children and live in the woods where I want to live and, all these other things. But I could foresee that it was going to create change. And I'm at the point in my life where it's like, it's time to do something that's a little more meaningful that would combine my income with basically my soul work, my purpose, the what is uniquely mine to do in this world that no one else can do but me, as how I've been gifted and through my experiences. So the concept of creating a brand called Heart Tru Living emerged about a year ago or so. It's been a journey where I've really had to just lean in and listen to, what is this? What is it going to become? Um, the concept of creating beautiful spaces and creating beautiful experiences is central to it. And some of that desire to shift into to being more anchored in beauty and in joy has come out of years of being burnt out and recovering from the burnout. So I had a period of probably 3 or 4 years. I was still working as a copywriter, but I was just, it was just a very quiet time for me. I've always been a very multi-dimensional, have many irons in the fire. I spent 20 years being led by trauma, either my own or others, healing, being led with healing that had a very heavy component to it, war trauma, war-based trauma. And as I've kind of, shifted out of that and had a space to just, heal and move slower and slowly out of that, I just have really felt that what's next for me is to be led by joy. And I think that's really true for many, many women today, even though we're in this really tumultuous time, very painful time in our society and in history. But I see it more as birth pains than as endings, even though endings are always part of new beginnings. So we do have endings too. But major change, major disruption, major uncertainty. Um, I really think that being anchored in beauty and being anchored in joy are just essential components to navigate our way through this. As I mentioned, I've always been led by intuition or what I feel is um, callings upon my life for that have deeper purpose. I was 16 years old when I first felt that I was meant to go to Bosnia. Um, it was the area where I grew up. There were a lot of people who had family back there. I don't have any family there, but a lot of people in the community did. So it was very prominent, the Bosnian conflict, the Bosnian War. This was in the early 90s. Very prominent in our local news, kind of on the headlines all the time. So I was very aware of it. I cannot tell you, I cannot answer why Bosnia to this day. There may have been a past life connection to that, but it's not something that I'm necessarily aware of as far as what that connection is. Um, that calling upon me was very strong. It lasted for 6 years before I actually ever got to Bosnia. During that time, my father, who was a little bit older and he was a physician, he developed cancer. He was ill for about a year before he passed. My parents had adopted a lot of children, and I was the oldest, so I was basically mom. For, I was mom. But anyway, a lot of heavy caretaking, a lot of home responsibilities. So a lot of that played into the timing between when I was first called to go there and when it actually became the right time for me to go there. Um, During that time, those 6 years, for a while, I was 18 when my father passed. Um, I really didn't know what I wanted to do as far as education. I had been home educated. Everybody expected me to go to school and become a doctor like my dad. I was like, nah, I don't want to. I had worked for my dad's private practice, so I was familiar with medicine. But I just kind of floundered around for 2 or 3 years as far as, not knowing what to do with education because I knew I was supposed to go to Bosnia, but I didn't know any of the pieces. I didn't know why. I just felt like I needed to be there. There was a reason. I had a real heart for them. Um, and eventually I ended up going to nursing school, became an LPN, knowing that I was still going to go to Bosnia, but I figured, well, this is a good skill to have. It's very employable. It would be really good to have if I live overseas. So there's a lot of reasons for that. And it was really comfortable for me because I grew up in a medical family and it was, secondhand basically because I knew so much about it already. So I became an LPN. But during that time, I started writing. I'd always done a lot of personal writing. I never really had aspirations to be a writer or be a journalist for that matter. Um, but I did have a strong desire to give people a voice. And giving people a voice is kind of the core anchor, soul mission of my life. And it always has been since I was probably about 12. And I like to write. So I thought, I'm going to, if I could use my writing to give people a voice, I would like to do that. And there just came a point where I was like, you know what? Journalism, writing, especially human interest stories, that would allow me to do that. So I was like, I was in the middle of nursing school and I decided that I was going to be a journalist. And I kind of, went around the normal route and literally got on the phone and started calling some editors and presenting story ideas to them. And they were like, yeah, okay. Um, so it was, really humbling and very interesting and kind of, it was scary because I was basically faking it till you make it. So, but I could write. So that's all they really cared about. They didn't really care, does she have a degree or not? They were like, can you write the story? And I was like, I can do it. And I, did it. And so I started getting some writing assignments while I was still in school. So that kind of just culminated. I knew I wanted to use journalism as a way to give people a voice, particularly people who were not traditionally being heard. Um, and I graduated nursing school, got my license literally like 2 weeks later, got on a plane, went to Bosnia for my first summer. This is the summer of 2000. I actually went with a group that was teaching English for the summer. I needed kind of a structured way to get there and go because I didn't know anybody there. But while I was there, I went to the local Associated Press office and met their journalists and, told them I was doing some freelance writing for some media back home. And, long story short, that's where I met my first husband. He was working there as a journalist. Um, I, at the time, thought that I needed a degree in journalism, so I had applied to the University of Minnesota with the intention to go back that after that summer and complete another 2 years of education. But when I got there, I was so out of place. It was like I could not find any peace. I love the classes. I love the campus. It's a beautiful, beautiful school. It's just I wasn't meant to be there. I could not justify spending 2 years there when one, I knew I needed to go back to Bosnia, and two, I was already writing stories and getting published and doing the writing that I wanted to do, the human interest stories that were kind of, off everybody else's radar, but I wanted to bring them to the surface. So after a few months, I quit. I was like, it was a hard decision because quitting isn't something that was ever really discussed or even modeled in my family. So it was like, it's like, but I knew I had to follow my heart. I mean, it was just I was literally starting to get sick because of um, how burdened my heart was about this is not the place I'm supposed to be. And so I quit and I had this huge sense of relief. I knew I had made the right decision. And I moved back home and made plans to go back to Bosnia, probably within a few months, I believe it was. And after that, I um, got involved with my ex-husband at the time. We ended up getting married over there. We had our first child, my son, there. We lived there and worked for 3.5, 4 years. And I was, it was it was a very heavy experience. Everybody there was a survivor of the war. Um, there was no fighting, but it was a peace held together by the international community. So we had UN peacekeepers, we had NATO troops. There was still a lot of tension. There were areas where I could not go as an American because of the threat level to Americans. And in other places, I was very, very welcomed as an American. Um, most Bosnians were extremely grateful to President Clinton for taking the action to actually stop the war. But the Bosnian War was stopped. Did not end. So it was an enforced peace agreement. which is, always very tenuous and not necessarily the way to end a civil war. So it was very, very much everything we wrote about was war related. We had a lot of mass graves. We had landmines. The city is still landmined. This is the city of Sarajevo, is where I was. A lot of atrocities from the war were coming to light. There was a lot going on with the International Tribunal in The Hague as far as prosecuting war criminals. A lot of political stories, but everything was related to the war.
Yeah.
The war had ended 5 years before I got there, but for practical purposes, you couldn't really tell that. Everything was still very much destroyed. They were just starting to get back on their feet. And I think I had too high of expectations for how fast a society would move after a war like that, and how constrained the trauma would make people. So Bosnia was under international governance for probably 15 years or so after their war, maybe a little longer. They had their own presidents and their own government, but basically they had to answer to the international community. So there was a kind of a level of monitoring and watchfulness over what they were doing. So yeah, so I was, I was the only American in our circle of journalists. Everyone else was local. We had a multinational, multi-ethnic crew. Everyone got along. So we had the Bosnian War was fought between Bosnian Serbs, Bosnian Muslims, and Bosnian Croats. 3 different ethnic groups, 3 different major religions, Christian Orthodox, Islam, and Catholic. Very long-standing, deeply entrained conflicts that went back hundreds, if not thousands of years. But the short story is after World War II, there was a leader called Tito who basically was social communist, put the various countries of that region together under what was called Yugoslavia, held them together under his rule. And they did well under his rule. I mean, they intermarried, they were friends, they worked together, they had a commonality in their sense of brotherhood under Tito. Well, when Tito passed in the early 80s, that lid lifted. And there was also a lot of political maneuvering by certain leaders to incite and remind people of their wounds and pit people against each other again. And they use the economy and jobs and various things, but it all erupted into a desire for independence. Bosnia decided they wanted to be independent from Yugoslavia, and Serbia, which had Belgrade, which was the capital of Yugoslavia. They also had the national army, or the federal army, you might say. So they had the most weaponry and manpower. They were like, no, you're not leaving. The stories were difficult. The environment was difficult. People treated me beautifully. We had beautiful friends. The toll it was taking on my mental health and my spiritual and emotional health was really severe. I was angry inside, and it was just this deep anger, but mostly at feeling so powerless against what I like to call the radiation of war. Just to give people a little background, because I know a lot of people don't remember much about the Bosnian War, but the Bosnian conflict was the first land battle in Europe after World War II. And it was also the most atrocious as far as it was very, very much like Nazi Germany when it came to concentration camps and, mass graves and um, a lot of rape, a lot of torture, genocide. So I was burnt out. And then kind of like at the apex of this intensity, my husband at the time decides he wants to move to the States. So we moved back.
I want to honor you truly
Mm,
for your courage, for doing what I'm guessing nobody else really understood, especially in your youth, feeling so compelled to go to a distant land where, as far as you knew, you had no genealogical connection,
mm-mm,
and putting your calling, what you sense to be your calling and your soul's purpose, ahead of anything else. The conveniences of being in the States, the distraction and numbing that happens in our culture to keep us away from the reality of what happens in the real world, and all of the very deep connections that you made while you were there, that while they were evidence of your calling and your purpose, must have torn at your heart and soul. And you just testified that they did. But still, it didn't deter you. And not only that, you continued to be the professional journalist and give a voice to the stories that you knew were happening there. Just tremendous, tremendous respect for what
mm.
you've been through, what you have taken the time to share with us here. So, when
So,
in the scheme of things, or the timeline, if you will, did you build and start writing the blog that I ultimately found, which, by the way, I realized it probably wasn't Google that returned that in the search results, because to be perfectly real, I don't go to Google first. I go to Yandex, actually. I find that there's a lot on Yandex that Google either buries or just doesn't even have. And what kind of impact did you see that that made?
sure. Um, so to answer that, I have to go back to Bosnia.
Okay.
Um, I After I had my son, I had set an intention to heal, motivated by the fact that I did not want my son to have a mother in the condition that I was in. Um, I wrote kind of a mantra for myself that I would read every day to help me let go of the anger and, kind of point myself in the direction of healing, um, which did help. So all of that is to say that I had this intention of healing. And so I was, paying attention to, various articles or well, I don't know if we had podcasts back then. We had blogs,
Yeah.
like personal blogs back at that time. Um, books, different things like that that would come across my path, which were meant for me to find. And they would be a stepping stone to help me a little bit more forward on my healing path. Um, so we moved back to the States, and I was still in a really dark place internally. Still had no idea if I would ever, you know, feel like myself again, if I would ever heal. I didn't know if it would happen. I really didn't, but it was still my intention because it just was not acceptable for me that my son would have a mother who was angry and in this state. While I was still in Bosnia, the Iraq war began after 9/11. I did not have any capacity left in me to give any energy or attention to another war. During that time, I had started to write about my experiences in Bosnia. Um, and a couple years passed. I had my second child, my daughter. I knew I wanted to work from home, but I wasn't sure how that was going to happen at the time. And that's when you know, that's when I started to move into freelance writing. And it started to pull on my heart that you know, there was a reason that I had been going through this just a few years ahead of them because, my healing journey was going to be important to help them heal. A friend of mine that I had known since I was a small child was in the National Guard, and he was with a deployment in Iraq that went on for, I want to say it was 22 months. It might have been 2 full years. They did not get sent home when they were supposed to. They were extended. But he came back and he just, you know, looked like a ghost. And it just touched me really deeply because at that point I was kind of starting to feel a little more healed. And I knew it's like, I have to do something. I can't just keep this journey to myself because it would help. So I started writing a book for combat veterans. It's called Close to Home, A Soldier's Guide to Returning from War. I think I experienced my greatest healing by writing the book. I knew it was also helping my dad, who had been a Korean War veteran. There was no, acceptable place for people to discuss war or combat, which is why I believe so many of our veterans came back and, turned to substance abuse to medicate because they were alone. And I knew even though my father had passed, um, I could still sense him in spirit, and I sensed him with me, particularly on a couple of the chapters I wrote. And I remember at one point I felt like his hand on my shoulder, and so that was really meaningful, and I think that was healing too, to know that it was not only going to heal forward, it was going to heal backwards as well. In 2008, I went on to um, have another baby, my youngest. And I also wrote some of my own novels and scripts and other things like that for my own creative writing. Continued with my technology writing work. Um, 2013 or so, um, people started responding. And this has to be a total divine orchestration because I don't know, I did not the only sharing I did of it was to share it on my personal Facebook profile. So that was it. I put the articles out there and I was like, I will just let God bring whoever needs to find it. And I have had so many instances of veterans reaching out and connecting with me and saying, like, you know, I was going to kill myself. And then I found your blog. So it was very, very humbling to see that, divine timing and orchestration that is just so beyond what humans can do on our own. People would reach out, mostly online. I did not make myself available for, phone conversations. I didn't want this intruding into my family life. So yeah, so that would be how the blog was formed, lifeafterwar.org. It's still up. One of my biggest fears and concerns before I really launched into it was the fact that I'm not a therapist. I'm not a, counselor. I don't have any background in education for that. I just have my life experiences, my soul, and what I feel guided to say. The average age of the veterans who were reaching out was 26 to 27. They'd been out of most of them had been out of conflict for a while, and they had tried everything else, and they were just at this point where they didn't know what else to do or where else to turn. Um, and there were some active duty troops as well. But I had a couple of young men at the time who were really tugging at my heart with their stories, with how they were showing up, with their desire to find a path to heal. Remember, there was a day where this internal conflict kind of just came to a head, and the thing that really made me say yes was the question, okay, what's going to happen to particularly these two young men, if I don't say yes? And I knew I had to. I mean, in my experience of callings, or what I feel is the divine asking me to do something, there is no saying no. So there is resistance and arguing and struggling and trying to run away. And in the end, it's always a yes, because it just is so insistent and relentless, and there's no peace unless I say yes. One of the most beautiful things for me was that within a few years, I literally had psychologists and mental health professionals asking me to train them how to help our combat veterans.
Wow.
I had Walter Reed Hospital wanted me to come and train their providers. The Ukraine at the time, this was before the current conflict, um, used my materials in their PTSD, translated into their PTSD programs. And it's because I wasn't qualified in the traditional sense that I was able to do what I was able to do and relate to these people in a much more um, personal way than you would get from a counselor that you were paying to do. There was no money involved whatsoever. This was all volunteer time of energy of myself. I helped, I think, with some of the trust.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Probably the most meaningful calling that I've had, that I've had the most visible
Mm.
reward from, in knowing that these lives were touched and some of them saved. And, there are children who have a father today because in that moment I was there.
I think back on the earlier part of your story and when you were in Bosnia and
Mhm.
how it struck you, and I love how you articulated, especially in our first meeting, is that energetically you could feel the darkness, the heaviness of a war that had been basically stopped but not
Mhm.
resolved.
Mhm.
And now moving forward into when you launched this blog, now you were taking those experiences and energetically creating a different kind of ripple that
Mhm.
was a healing ripple. And it didn't stop in, your blog or online or even in the States because everything was international. This is content
Mhm.
that anyone could read and consume and learn from. And I love how you eventually your fears of not being, good enough or qualified or any of those things were dispelled by the basically these huge organizations enlisting you to educate them on how they could help veterans heal and have a way forward. And I think it's a testament both to the wisdom of the creator and the divine, but also once again to your incredible commitment and courage to follow where that was leading you. In a way, because you weren't qualified by conventional standards and in that a graduate of those educational systems, you were freer.
Mhm.
I have friends that are therapists and they have to energetically deal with kind of the frustration of there's so much more I could potentially say or do, but
Mhm.
I can't
Mhm.
because this is how I have to behave in this
Yeah.
context.
I don't remember a time in this lifetime where I didn't feel close to God or feel God close to me. Um, and I also have always had a sense that my life is not my own, that I am here for service. How we respond to these opportunities and to what is calling towards us, you know, I'm not sure I could actually get to say no, but we can say no. I mean, we have the choice to say no, and we can go down a different path. Um, when you do say yes to a calling, I think that the divine makes it a point to make sure that you know this matters and this is important and this is where you're meant to be, even in the midst of, it can be really, really emotionally difficult. It's more like I feel more compelled and I just don't get to say no. I can for a while, but eventually no. And when I step into what I'm supposed to do, everything aligns within me. And I know this is where I'm supposed to be. This is what I'm supposed to be doing. And that assurance is kind of what anchors me, even if things get difficult and, I don't know how to navigate different things that come up.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I would like to explore a little bit with you. You know, you have had a strong sense, as you've said, that you know what you're here to do, what you're calling, what your purpose, what your mission is. You've always felt very connected to that.
Mhm.
How would you advise someone who's really struggling with just that? Like they're
Mhm.
flailing. They don't know, what am I even here for? What do I do? You know, I don't feel like anything about my life makes any sense at all. Am I just off base with everything? Like how would you advise someone who's feeling that right now?
Well, that's kind of what I built Heart True Living all around. So, the first course I've got out there right now is called What's Next for You. And it really is about cutting through the noise, getting beyond barriers, reconnecting to your heart's deepest desires and your higher self or the divine's wisdom for you, which I call a combination of the divine GPS. And then how do you take action and how do you step into that in a way that's sustainable, that's not overwhelming, that you're able to replicate anytime you're going through a change. But to more clearly respond to your question, I think the first thing would be you have to get quiet and you have to start listening to the desires in your heart, even if those desires seem selfish. And the myth that the heart's desires are selfish, and I'm not talking about just, frivolous desires. I'm talking about things that are deep in you that keep tugging at you, that keep resurfacing, um, that lean towards a calling, but it feels like a desire because it might feel selfish. Um, what I feel that is God's guidance. God leads through the desires of the heart, and He puts the desires actually in us. And we've been taught, especially as women, that it's selfish, one, to have desires, and it's, definitely selfish to do something about them. Um, I want to break through that myth. The myth of it being selfish is designed to keep us small and to keep us from having a deeper impact. And that's stuff that I work through in the course. And I actually have a webinar that's available that literally talks about this. But, listening to your heart and kind of digging out from all the stuff that's layered on top of it, all the assumptions about what you should do or what you shouldn't do, of other people's expectations. Obviously, there's a lot of layers of fear that we typically have to move through and uncover. Um, but the heart will keep speaking up. It'll keep bringing the desires up. You can keep pushing them away, but it very likely will be, you can push it away for years. And if somebody asks you, well, what would you really do if you could do anything you wanted? That thing's going to pop right up again. It's like it's still there. It's just waiting for you to actually give it some attention.
Yeah.
And the reason I used to be more, well, I've always been intuition based, as like I've said. That's how I move through life, is by intuition. That's how I'm guided. What I've been learning in the last decade is to pay attention to what starts from the inside. So those are that's kind of how I differentiate between intuition or an outside calling that's pulling on you, tugging to you, versus something that starts from within your heart and your own desires. And it usually feels like it's just something for you. And at least that's my experience. So here's an example. This little desire crept into my heart that said, find a place in the wilderness. Like, go be in the wilderness. That is not what I can do right now. I cannot literally drop everything and go, find a nice, quiet little cabin in the woods and live my life there, even though it sounded really attractive. I had to get over the sense that it would be selfish for me to follow that, because I could not see how that would correlate with what was happening with my veterans and where things were going. The key point here is I couldn't see it at the time. I literally got on my computer right there at the gate. I found a home, a little cabin, a 1970s little cabin on a small lake, 20 acres of pines, my dream place. I was like, yes, I want this. I called a realtor. I went and saw it like the next day, fell in love with the place. I was walking around this beautiful property and had the idea, which I hadn't had before at all, of being able to host people who were doing healing work in the world, particularly women, for times of retreat and renewal. As it would be, that property was already under contract. So as much as I prayed and wanted that place to be mine, it was not going to be. I had about 9 months of actively, daily looking for properties. I think I had 3 or 4 contracts on properties that almost fit my dream list, but not quite. But I was like, okay, those fell through for various reasons. That property didn't work out. And there was probably 2 or 3 months where I just kind of gave up. Big light bulb moment there for you. It was everything on my list. It was above and beyond what I could ever imagine I would be blessed with or entrusted to live in. 40 acres, old growth, white pines,
Oof.
gorgeous property,
Yeah.
budding up to a very small private lake, lots of wetland. It is rolling hills, beautiful vistas. Absolutely. It is. I still wake up every day in awe that I get to live here. To get back to why the desires of your heart matter, I had no idea why that desire would matter. It seemed selfish. It seemed like just something that really mattered to me. I wanted to live back in the woods. I had never really let my feelings matter before. But what I didn't know was, following that desire, one, it would eventually lead to Heart Tru Living. It would lead to the vision of the hospitality aspect, because I do have a guest house now today. It's actually where I'm at right now.
Oof.
The other thing, though, the really, really big thing I didn't know, is that it would lead to my meeting the love of my life, I'm now married to. And few years later, here we are. We've been married a couple years. We have a beautiful, beautiful relationship. We work together. We do, we partner pretty much on everything. I, I'm 49 now. Um, I, I had no idea that you could be partnered with somebody who could meet me on so many different aspects and areas of my life, um, and just be that really beautiful, mature, divine masculine energy,
Yeah.
which has been and still is very healing for me. It's like that little desire is responsible for allowing all this other stuff to flow into my life. When I met my husband, I really wanted to have an experience. I wanted to know what it felt like to take all that energy that I had been pouring into so many other people, primarily men, but other people, um, and be able to just pour that into devotion to one person, to one soul. And that's exactly what happened. Without me doing anything, veterans stopped reaching out.
Mhm.
It just naturally, they just naturally stopped reaching out. It's like I have no,
Same way it started.
I didn't do it. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. It's like
Yeah.
I, you know, it was exactly how it was supposed to unfold in a way that felt that it still honored. And I've left, like I said, I've left the site up. It will stay up. I'm always available if someone does reach out. It's just that they don't anymore. Now I do get to experience what it's like to, live in devotion to one soul who gets all of me.
Yeah.
So,
Beautiful.
yeah.
And
Oh,
you
yeah,
lit
it
up when you
is.
said that too. You've been through so much and healed from so much and helped so many other people. And
There's downloadable workshops, there's a membership program, there's group coaching, um, and then there's also a blog
you,
that's on there. So there's a combination of, obviously free support, and there's a combination of paid programs. So
what do you do to decompress? Oh, you have this beautiful property and
Mhm.
you can't say enough about how blessed you are to have that. But what do you
Mhm.
do for fun? How do you decompress from all these things that weigh on you? Every now and then we have to just, let it all go for a few minutes or a few hours and recharge. How does Britta recharge?
Absolutely. And we definitely need to do that. We need to do more of it, including me. But I am out in the woods. Um, I have trails in the woods. I have deer paths in the woods in the winter and overrun by bugs. I'm out there every day. That's actually probably vital to my well-being. I have a big flower garden, but every year I do that. So that becomes my time outdoors. Do a lot of journaling. Um, that's core to me being able to process. Reading, spending a lot of time with my beautiful husband. I intentionally live at a slower pace. I intentionally live with a lot of spaciousness in my time and schedule. And I'm very blessed to be able to be in command of my time and schedule. I try to have some boundaries that
Yeah.
really preserve and protect my energy and what matters, what's important to me.
There are so many other things I could pull out of what you've said and do a whole show just on those other things, but
Mhm. We
um
might have to do
we
more
might
shows.
have to do, yeah, because there's just so much here.
There
And
really is so much.
but that's perfect. Just like your blog and just like everything else you've done, the right people are gonna find this particular
Hmm.
episode. And like you,
Hmm.
my vision for Off the Deep End has always been, even if it's just a handful of people, that hear about these incredible people I'm hosting, fine, because I'm
Hmm.
not marketing, I'm not advertising. This is all word of
Hmm.
mouth right now,
Yeah,
which word is getting around, and I'm glad for that. But
wonderful. Yeah.
Britta, it has just been a fun conversation, an enlightening conversation. And I'm so honored that you shared
Mhm.
your story with me and my audience today. And I really look forward to seeing the progress and the updates in the future of your new programs and how you're helping women. Sounds like we
Mhm.
share a lot of the same passions when it comes to
Mhm.
helping women reconnect with that part of themselves that maybe they've just lost touch with.
Absolutely.
And so, yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing where all of that goes for you. Thanks so much
Thank
for
you.
sharing.
Oh, my pleasure.
Please, everybody, if you're not already subscribed to the channel, remember to do that. Comment, like, share, get as many eyes on this incredible story as you can. And yeah, thank you for watching.